Hi, welcome to Luchi's Cake Boulevard online professional baking course. So in this video, we're going to talk about preparation. So whenever you receive an inquiry from a potential client or customer, the most important thing for you to do is to prepare to achieve whatever order that they are putting across to you. So number one, in preparation, you need to get as many details of what the client wants as possible. That is, you need to know the cake flavors that they would want. You need to know the cake sizes that they would like. You also need to know the frosting, if there are any special requests with regards to frosting and finishings as well. Then you also need to know their preferred final design of the cake, and if they would like any other additions such as delivery to the location and whatnot. So once you've obtained all the details from your client, you now need to give them a quote. So the quote should be clear and thorough enough to be able to explain to them the final price of your cake, as well as any other additions that influence the final price of your cake. For example, delivery costs, or if they need any other special customizations that are away from the basic price that is usually seen on your menu. So once you've given a quotation, you are satisfied with the whole process. Depending on your business practice, if you do take a deposit or you take the whole amount before you start working on the cake, you need to go ahead and do that. Once you have secured the order, you finalized all the details of your cake. Now you need to know your recipe very well according to the client's preference. Ensure that you are familiar with what you're going to bake before you even bake it, and ensure that you have baked it before you try to attempt to bake it for a client. When it's time to actually bake the cake, the first thing that you need to do is clean up all your work surfaces. You can use a mild detergent and a clean cloth to wipe down all your work surfaces. You can also rinse the surfaces off afterwards with a clean cloth and some plain water to just remove any traces of detergent. And then when the surfaces are dry, you can now go ahead and use some white vinegar. I usually put this in a spray bottle and just spray all the surfaces and wipe them down before I start measuring out my ingredients. Once your work surfaces are clean, go ahead and verify the flavors that your clients requested and the sizes as well. And now start to gather your ingredients according to the client's request. So in this particular video, I am baking a vanilla and chocolate flavored cake for one client. Gather up all the utensils and containers that you're going to measure your ingredients in for each cake flavor. Start measuring out each ingredient for a particular cake flavor in a separate vessel or container. Ensure that you're using the appropriate measuring methods as advised in the recipe. So in this case, I am using a digital electronic scale for my flour. Ensure that the scale is zeroed before you attempt to put any ingredient in the vessel that you've selected. And go ahead and measure out the requested amount. For all the ingredients that you're going to measure out using a digital electronic scale, ensure that your scale is zeroed before you measure the next ingredient. For volume measurements, ensure that you use the appropriate measuring spoons and cups. For certain ingredients such as your leavening agents, baking powder and baking soda, you might need to use a measuring spoon to measure out. Scoop out the ingredient and ensure that you level the top of your spoon before you put it in your respectful container. When you're measuring out liquids using cups and spoons, ensure that you filled it up to the mark, which shows you that this is exactly 1 cup or 2 cups or half a cup, and so on. For the eggs, make sure that number 1, you're using fresh eggs. Number 2, ensure that you have 2 or 3 separate containers while breaking your eggs. So you need to break your egg in the first container and ensure that it is fresh before pouring it into the main container where you are measuring out your eggs into. So the main reason why we break eggs into a separate container is that, number one, we need to ensure that each egg is fresh before adding it to the main batch of eggs that we're measuring out. And number two, that we do not get any debris such as eggshells into the main batch of eggs that we are going to be using for the cake. Wash your hands thoroughly after handling the eggs and ensure that you clean your work surfaces, remove the eggshells before going on to touch other ingredients. So once you've measured out all the ingredients for each respectful cake flavor that you're going to be baking, go through again and verify that you have everything that you need and that you're not missing any particular ingredient. Kindly ensure that you've brought all your ingredients to room temperature. Ingredients such as eggs and milk, your baking fats such as margarine or butter should be at room temperature before you start mixing your cake batter. It is important to bring your cold ingredients to room temperature before you attempt to mix the cake batter because cold ingredients have a tendency of not combining properly with each other. They do cause separations and they will most likely give you a tough chewy cake. So once you've gathered your ingredients, you've measured them out accurately for each respectful cake flavor, and you brought them to room temperature, it is now time to prepare your baking pans. So go ahead and get the required baking pans. Apply a thin layer of margarine or butter to the sides and the bottom of your pan, and ensure that it is covering all the surfaces that you anticipate that the cake will rise into. Then you can go ahead and dust the cake pans with a bit of cake flour or all-purpose flour and tap out the excess. Then you need to preheat your oven. Ensure that it is set at the appropriate temperature recommended in the recipe. Ensure that the baking rack where your pans will sit is in the middle of the oven, depending on the type of oven that you're using. So the order of mixing your cake ingredients is largely dependent on the recipe and what method it calls for. We have the creaming method, we have the reverse creaming method, we have the all-in-one method, and so on. So you do need to follow the instructions that are given in a particular recipe as you start to combine your ingredients. And then now you can go ahead and start mixing your cake batter. Once your cake batter is mixed accordingly, go ahead and get your baking pans. You can use a digital electronic scale. Place the cake pan on top of the scale, zero the scale, and scoop out your cake batter into the pan. And then go ahead and do the same into the other pan. This will just help you to achieve similar cake layers. The advantage of having an almost equal amount of cake batter in each cake pan as you're about to bake your cake is that, number one, the time that it requires to bake both cakes or all the cake layers that you've scooped out will be similar. You bake them in the same period of time. And number two, you will be able to have even looking cake layers which are more professional. So you can go ahead and put your baking pans into the oven, bake them for the recommended duration, and once they're done, check with a toothpick inserted in the center of the cake for doneness. If the toothpick comes out clean without any wet cake batter, then your cakes are ready. Go ahead and remove them from the oven and place them in the cooling rack. Let the baking pan cool slightly to the point where you can comfortably touch with your hands, but it is still slightly warm. And then tap the sides and the bottom of your pan and go ahead and release your cake from the pan. Leave it to cool to room temperature, and then now you can go ahead and handle it in whichever appropriate way that you would want to do. As a professional baker, always practice mise-a-place. That is having all the things that you need in place before you start baking. This just helps you to be, number one, efficient, to be effective, to be organized. It helps you to have predictable movement in your baking space, and it is also an aid to hygiene. There is nothing professional about a baker who just goes ahead and starts dumping ingredients into a mixing bowl, and in the middle of the mixing realizes that they do not have baking powder or they do not have vanilla available, and they have to stop somewhere and go and pick up that ingredient. So be professional in your baking and conduct yourself as such. Happy baking!